welcome to today's Sexpert interview. Today I have Laura Brotherson, Laura M. Brotherson. She's a licensed marriage family therapist and a certified sex therapist, which is a unique combination. Now, I've known Laura for a few years. We go back at least 3 years, and she's spoken at my Get Your Marriage On live event before. She's the author of 3 amazing books. Knowing Her Intimately is the main book that's fantastic. My wife and I have read it. It's all about the female sexual wiring. She has another book called And They Were Not Ashamed, and another book called From Honeymoon to Ever After. So
Honeymoon to happily
from the
ever
honeymoon
after.
to happily ever after.
You got it.
Yep. And Laura, you'll like Laura because she's a firecracker of a personality, lots of energy, and really passionate about sex. So, Laura, today we get to talk about sex.
We got to talk about sex today. How fun is that? You know, Dan, you know how I start all these, right?
Yep, I had to take your line there.
No, it's good. I shouldn't have interrupted your line.
That's great. So, Laura, I'm interested. How did you get into this? Like, did you always want to be a sex therapist? Like in high school when you did the aptitude test, is that like scored high for you? Like, what got you into it?
Wouldn't that be funny if that was true? No, back in high school though, I did know that I wanted to be a marriage counselor. So that was already on tap. I figured out I wanted to be a sex therapist probably after I was teaching a course. I taught a course on strengthening marriage, just kind of an institute community courses kind of thing. And a third of the material was about sex. And I was like, I need to get this information out there more. And people were just so hungry for that information when I was teaching that. And so when it came time to teach that class again, I was like, you know what, I need to put this in a book so I can reach a lot more people, which we're just going on our like almost 100,000 copies of that first book. So
wow, congratulations.
that's a lot more people I need to reach than just what I can in a class. But so I just realized there that I needed to get it into a book, and I needed to and then when I wrote my first book, I didn't even have my master's degree yet. I still just had my bachelor's degree in family science, marriage and family therapy precursor. And so I just knew that was something I probably needed to get into. And then as I was getting my master's degree later on in marriage, when my youngest went into school, then I just knew I needed to be a sex therapist because there weren't any out there. And I mean, when I lived in Idaho, I was the only certified sex therapist in the state of Idaho. And even in Utah now, there's a handful only. So I just knew it needed to be done. There wasn't very many people that were doing it. There aren't very many people that want to do it. I you know me, Dan, I'm kind of fearless. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm a total extrovert, as you know.
Uh-huh.
And it never was a scary thing for me. It was just, let's do this.
That's great. That's good. I know you've talked in the past about you've had some personal transformation you've had to go through yourself.
Oh, sure.
You did a lot of journaling.
Sure.
You had an event with some postpartum depression a little bit, and how sex kind of helped you get through that a little bit more too. Do you want to speak on any of that?
Yeah, I almost forgot about all that. I literally almost forgot because, I mean, yeah, it was part of my personal journey as well. Like I said, I already knew I wanted to be a marriage counselor, but then when real life happens and I'm like, oh my goodness, my husband really likes this sex thing. And I thought I did, but it's not that big of a thing and not that much on my mind. So I'm going to have to figure this out if I want to have this awesome marriage that I'm going to try to go teach everyone else to have. So yeah, then I did have to dive in and I basically created the wheel that I can now share with other women and men, couples, so that they can have what I've learned how to create through my own experience and through, learning, education, and knowledge.
Great. Well, let's talk about your wheel. I think it's there's 12 steps to it, and they all start with the letter T. But we've read in your book, Knowing Her Intimately, which is a great title for a book.
Yeah.
With the word "know" kind of a nod to the biblical term to know someone.
Yeah.
I like that. The
The biblical term for sex, right?
yeah,
People
right.
don't always know that's the word for sex in the Bible, to know.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Would you give those reading or watching this or listening a brief overview of your 12 T's?
Yeah, yeah,
They build on top of each other, and it's
yeah.
excellent, I think.
Yeah, so this is, we're referring now to this book, Knowing Her Intimately, which literally what I did, Dan, is I just wanted to say, okay, I can't get at, this is my second book, I can't get at people enough. I don't have enough time to see people. I already have a huge wait list all the time anyway. And so I was like, okay, what can I do to put all of the parts of sexual wholeness for women in a book? And so that, and then walk them through very practical application. I'm more of a hands-on gal than a theoretical gal, and so
Uh-huh.
I take the theories and put them into practice for people. That's my forte. That's what I do, just because I'm an action girl. And so these 12 T's, I just took everything that anybody needs to know about healthy sexuality for women and put them into these. So here's what they are. Transform. Number one is transformed. That's transforming your sexual identity, your identity to include your sexuality. What we know is just a lot of women have kind of almost an asexual view of self. So where men don't have that problem, you're a sexual being. We struggle a little more with that. We have a little harder time with that, according to the research. So that's foundational. Step one key. Women have to know, embrace, nurture, tune into, enjoy, learn to enjoy that sexual self. That's that God-given sexuality. So that's key. Number one. Number two, thoughts. Oh, and the cool thing about this, I think you sort of mentioned this, is that everything is a T. Like I'm working on the husband book right now, and everything is not one nice little letter, and I'm so frustrated about that. But all of the women topics are 12 T's, so that's really cool. So the T number two is thoughts and beliefs. Sexy is a state of mind. So if women have a lot of negative, crappy thinking going on, they're going to get really stuck walking into and embracing their sexual wholeness. So that's number two. Number three is tenderness, trust, thoughtfulness. It's that emotional connection, that emotional foundation. I kind of call it the emotional foreplay, the emotional context. That's almost the equivalent, Dan, as of men having kind of their testosterone that will drive the sexual desire. For women, it's that emotional connection that drives our sexual desire at a core level. So that's number three. Number four is time. This is just the gist of making sex a priority. Women are the World Wide Web. Men are more compartmentalized. And so if women do not actively make sex and sexual learning and sexual knowledge a priority, it just will never get to the top of their to-do list. So that's number four. Number five is transition. Women have a really tough time getting from mommy mode or employer mode or employee mode, working mode, into wife mode and lover mode. And so they need to develop that part of a transition process. Number six is talk. Talk is the means by which women and men, husbands and wives, connect. But it's also, there's a secret in my talk chapter that we might get to or might not, that I call auditory arousal. That is a missing element, kind of a parallel to, for you guys, if there's no visual in the lovemaking, it's kind of a bummer. And we have this dimension that we're kind of missing for a lot of women. So this talk is both important outside the bedroom and inside the bedroom as well. Okay. So touch is number seven. And this is touch, affection outside the bedroom, but of course, important touch inside the bedroom. And a key piece, as you can imagine, Dan, is a lot of couples do not understand the importance of clitoral stimulation for a woman. It's kind of like ignoring penile stimulation for a man. It just wouldn't work really well. So
Right.
that's a really important chapter too, right?
If I can interrupt a bit, we're on
Go.
what, the seventh T now?
Seven.
And now we're finally getting to touch. I think
Yeah.
that's insightful. Like up until now, it's all like too
Context.
many couples, I think, jump in at, well, maybe my technique is bad, or I need to
Yep.
touch you better, or maybe it's a little more to the left, or whatever it
Yep.
is. But
Yep.
that's not it. You got to, start a little lower level sometimes.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Dan. I mean, just that's why I kind of laugh, because men will get this book and they'll go right to my next T number 8, which is technique, or they'll jump ahead to the 2 T's we're going to talk about, which is teasing and teasing and treats, teasing and treats. And so it's just kind of funny, because if you think like a man only and you do not get this female information, you are going to be in big trouble, because you just aren't going to know how your wife is wired in a way to really connect. Because yeah, men are going to dive into a technique or a position or something, or some kind of novelty thing, whereas they're missing, the first half, which is all contextual, mostly emotional. So I am really glad you brought that up. Very good point. Okay, so 8 was technique and education. If I had another interview that I did, someone asked me, they said, so Laura, what percentage of couples do you think get this, like really get it? And I says, well, if they don't know what I teach in this book, Knowing Her Intimately, then they don't get it, because they won't understand the inhibitors and the intricacies of female sexual wiring, and they will just be shooting blanks. That's a terrible analogy.
Right.
But it won't be working well, because they won't understand what they need to know.
So wait, just summarize. Technique doesn't matter if you don't get the other things right, is what you're saying.
Won't matter at all. It won't matter at all. And I know that sounds just so discouraging to a lot of men, but if they get that and they can accept that, then we can do awesome. They just have to be okay with that. So, and they'll have to take it up with God if they have a problem with it, because God's the one that wired women the way he did. So
Right.
what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Okay, so number 9 is tuned in. I think this might be my favorite, if I have to pick a favorite, just because I truly believe, Dan, that if people will learn what I think they need to know and will do the work of personal growth and development, that they can have what I think is a storybook wedding, marriage. They really can have that marriage that you dream of. And if people will do the work, I know it's possible. So that's the chapter where I walk them through how to do that as well. Chapter 10, T number 10 is teasing, which we'll talk a little bit about. And that's just putting the fun and flirty back into marriage. Now, this is not a strength for a lot of women. These next 2 chapters that we're going to talk mostly about today, they're not the areas that women tend to do the best on. And so teasing is a really important part of wholeness for men and women, but especially for women. T number 11 is treats. And that's just, I was on KSL and we did an interview just on marriage and long-term marriages. And we talked about how sad it is that so many of our marriages die after 20, 30 years, empty nesters, because they just are, they've lost the spark. They've lost that fun that we're going to talk about. And so if we don't add in some of this novelty and fun and adventure, like we're going to talk about today, then we're going to really struggle as we get further down the marriage train, So,
Great.
And that's an important part you get. And the last one, 12, another favorite, transcendence and surrender. And just the simplified application concept here is, if a woman is not able to relax and let go into the sexual experience, she's going to have a hard time having an orgasm and climaxing, because that orgasm is an involuntary response. And so that's a whole bunch of personal wholeness and development just in T number 12. So
Great.
that's a lot of big stuff. But
Yeah,
hey, I just spelled it out easy for them.
Great. Well, I'm really interested in today talking with you on the idea of novelty and adding variety to your lovemaking routine.
Mm-hmm.
You said something in one of your books once that really, like, I don't know, it sent a message home to me, that you said variety adds vitality. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, variety adds vitality, because like you said, if you don't keep some of this passion and wholeness which is just a much more alive. One of the big motivators I talk to women about when they're like, oh, I don't want to work on this. I hate the word sextraordinary, which is one of my favorite words, part of my book title. But they're just like, I don't even want to. And I say, okay, you maybe don't want to do this for your husband because they've got a bunch of baggage and a bunch of resentment in there, but they usually can do it for their own wholeness and aliveness. And so working on just that whole part of it, and variety and treats and teasing being a part of that, if we don't have that element in there, we're going to be missing an important part of whole. So that's just kind of why that's an important element.
Gotcha. Is that why couples complain that like sex has gotten boring after a few years of marriage?
Sure, yeah. But the thing too about that's a little mistaken maybe understanding about the variety part is that the most important variety in a marriage is actually connection and wholeness. When someone is connected and whole, variety is such a natural part of your living. What we're going to talk about today is probably a little bit more of kind of the little bit more intentional kind of variety, which is great too. But I just want people to understand that that foundational aspect of connection and wholeness is where your best novelty, variety, fun, passion comes from.
Oh, great. Are
You know,
there any examples you can share, maybe from your practice or someone that's kind of didn't understand that concept, but they really took it in and then they saw their marriage transform?
yeah. So, I think a lot of the things in that specific dimension is just when a lot of couples can't even do the treats and teasing sections until they've done these other things that I've talked about, the connection and the personal wholeness stuff, because it's usually just kind of one-sided. It's kind of forced upon by the other person. So I think what an example maybe of what you're asking is a couple where they did all of this work, they got to a really strong healthy place, and she was so cute one day when she came in and she goes, Laura, we have created a sex bucket list. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. And she told me all about that, and just that was such a huge accomplishment for her. And and just being able to do some of these things were a little outside the box for them, but just felt like such a natural organic part of the kind of awesomeness that they have been able to create in their marriage.
Okay, great. Very good. So let's talk more specifically about adding variety.
Okay.
Some of the questions some of our readers and people that download the app have are like, um, I'm a husband. I'm really interested in this particular sexual act,
Yeah.
or buying this, or doing this
Yep.
over here or over there. Um, and it can create a conflict in the relationship
Yep.
if the spouse doesn't want to do that. And you have a lot of good counsel on this topic in your books and whatever. Can you talk on this a little bit more? How do couples really, overcome that or come to peace about those things?
Yeah. So I think you're asking about just what do we do when we've got a couple that one of them wants to do something and maybe one of them doesn't want to do something? Is that like
Yes.
that?
Uh-huh.
And I think this kind of fits in from my angle. This fits into that area of the what's okay, what isn't questions that I get a ton of. A husband wants to do oral sex and the wife is just gagged by it. So I mean that's probably the most common
Is
one.
that that's probably a bad pun, but right. Well,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Sorry again. So sorry, everybody. But yes. But yeah, so there's kind of a lot of principles that kind of go behind because I have a whole, little section as you're talking about in my what's okay, what in the knowing her intimately about the what's okay, what isn't. Because you've got some of these principles to kind of, maybe I'll just kind of walk through a little bit, just briefly. We've already talked about kind of number one, we've got to have that personal wholeness, challenging ourselves before we challenge our spouse. That's kind of, that's balancing the confrontation between self and spouse. So for example, if I'm the husband and I really want my wife to do X, Y, or Z, I'm going to challenge myself about why do I really need that? Is that really that important? What are my motives? I'm going to challenge me before I'm going to challenge my wife to make her do this. Does that make sense? So that's one of the principles. Another one is
Can you
go,
speak on that just a little bit
go.
more? Like, sometimes it could be a husband or wife, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. But part of the reason why they're asking their wife about doing X, Y, or Z is probably to like make their own, to legitimize their own sexuality because they themselves
Sure.
are unsure about something.
You
And
bet.
that's kind of coming from a weak place. Is that kind of what you're referring to there? You kind of
Yeah.
need to
And
think through like, will this really add to our relationship? And is it because I'm offering something and giving rather than a take? Is that
yes, that's a great, great analogy. I speak to that give and take concept all the time. And that kind of comes into some of the questions that I can share with you in a second too. But yeah, if for example, the man is, you know, picked up this thing he's seen in pornography, for example, which I run into a lot, and he wants to, you know, he thinks he's developed that as part of his, you know, sexual arousal template, be unhealthily, right? And then he's kind of wanting to put that upon her, but it is something that feels off or demeaning or uncomfortable or disgusting or whatever to her, then yeah, that's kind of why it's important for him to challenge himself instead of challenge her, to say, okay, is this coming from porn? Is this coming from a desire to legitimize and validate my own sexuality? This is why my last book that I'm going to write is the husband book, Knowing Him Sexually, where a big part of what I talk about in there is helping men learn how to get validation from themselves and from God about their sexuality, so they aren't seeking it outside of themselves. And that's a big part of it. But let me flip the tables a little bit too. Let's say you've got a woman who just really hasn't embraced her sexuality, hasn't developed that at all, and she's just being asked to, let's say she's being asked to wear lingerie, okay? And so that might be really uncomfortable for her. That might be really out of her norm. But from her side of things, she might consider challenging herself to say, okay, what is my issue with not doing that? Is it my body image issues? Do I need to do some processing on that? Is it that this reminds me of something I think my husband has seen in porn? Do I need to do some processing on that? I mean, so it's just kind of this balanced self-confrontation, which is kind of a term that, you know, clinically we use for differentiation, self-differentiation. And it's just kind of a balance between, are we equally challenging each other, ourselves, and not just one person always kind of giving in and one person always taking. So I think that's kind of what you're asking.
That's great.
Right?
Yeah, I've heard it said another way, and that's creating a marriage where there's room for two people. I like
Yes.
that idea. It's not just all me and it's not all you.
Yes.
Both people need to work at that all the time.
Yes. Yes. And
Gotcha.
Dan, that's what I would call a sextraordinary marriage. Two whole, I mean, the analogy I use is we come into marriage kind of as two half people. We come to marriage, we feel like, oh, I've finally come home. I feel complete.
Complete me.
You complete me, like Tom Cruise says in some movie that I haven't seen. But anyways, you complete me. But what God really has in store is that in marriage, he's wanting you to become two whole people who can then become one.
Right.
And so that is, and that's two separate individual humans that we know how to show mutual respect for each other. Let me run through a couple of these other thoughts too. So working through inhibitions, kind of like what we talked about, women have to work through some of those inhibitions if that's their issue. Understanding the effects of kind of unhealthy sexuality, maybe pornified sexuality, obsessive focus on sexuality, compulsive sexuality. We've kind of got to know that we might be dealing with that, because that affects which way we lean in finding healthy and whole. Understanding the difference between the healthy and unhealthy sexuality we talked about. This is a big one. Understanding the difference between what I call an 80-20 relationship dynamic, which is a power differential in a marriage. So every marriage has a stronger personality, a more dominant personality, and a softer personality. Is that clear to you?
Yep.
Okay. And so if you don't know which side you kind of lean towards, so like in my marriage, I'm the dominant personality. I'm what I call the 80%er. My husband is the 20%er. So if in my marriage, I always get my way sexually, I always get my way outside the bedroom, then I have an unbalanced marriage. So I know as an 80%er, I've got to move towards him, and he might need to kind of demand a little more of me. Okay,
Got
does
it.
that make sense? And that's
Right.
important too. So I think those are kind of the main ones, just understanding the concept of mutual respect and agency, because again, if either person is basically making demands on the other person, even if they've got illegitimate reasons, then you're messing with someone's agency, and you're going to create resentment and unhealthiness in your marriage. Okay.
Gotcha. And long term, that's going to hurt more than
Yeah.
help.
Yeah. And so now, now from this point, Dan, I know I'm being a little bit more deep than maybe people are used to hearing on something like this, but this is what I do for a living, is which is probably what you wanted. But now we're going into questions like, what's the purpose of this behavior? Does either spouse feel demeaned or objectified? Does either spouse demanding or seem overly obsessed with this particular thing? What's the long-term consequences of having this behavior? Is it going to strengthen long-term or weaken long-term? So we've got some of these kinds of questions. That there's 9 questions that I walk people through in the book, so that they can walk through and figure this stuff out, because it's not stuff you can ask a bishop or even a friend. Really the only person you can help you with if you get stuck is a marriage counselor or sex therapist.
Gotcha. That's good.
Right?
All right. Let's say you're a couple and you, I guess the stigma is, if you want more ideas of what to do in bed, you have to look at porn to get ideas.
Oh.
What if you don't look at porn, you don't want to look at porn, and you want ideas of new fun things to try because you already worked, you've already done the work, but like where's a legitimate place for people to go get ideas?
Yeah, well, that's why I've written 3 books, Dan. That's why you've created a really awesome app, is because like chapter 11, treats, I've got a whole list of all of these different categories of creativity and novelty and adventure that people can use to then together kind of brainstorm their own kind of bucket list. And let me just run through some of these for people,
Yeah,
because
let's do that.
the cool thing, Dan, is that all you have to do is something different than you normally do to fire those cylinders in the brain of novelty and fun and adventure. So all we have to do is something different. So here's the thing. So locations, have sex in a different location. Duration, spend a different amount of time than you normally do. Time, have sex at a different time of day. Instead of always at night, do it in the morning. Speed, maybe it's usually just a real fast quickie. So now we're going to spend 2 hours of luxurious, long-term gourmet sex lovemaking. Intensity, kind of the quickie intensity versus just the slow and soft and subtle, change it up. Positions, there's a bunch of positions. That's usually the go-to that most people go to.
Yeah.
That's just one of many things. Scenarios. This is one of my favorite things. It's kind of attached to my auditory arousal that I talk about in the book. But just with that auditory stimulation where you're maybe role playing a scenario, role playing having sex on a beach. I mean, people would be amazed at how many great places you can have sex because you're just doing it in your mind.
Gotcha.
And sharing it. And that's
like
super.
You can have sex in a phone booth, but actually in the closet of your house. Kind of a concept,
yes,
right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So great. Scenarios, change up your foreplay. If you always do this, this, and this in your foreplay, do this, this, and this instead. Do something different in your foreplay process. Change up your ambiance. Add in some lights. Add in some candles. Do you have bedroom music? Do you have mood music? I'm amazed at how many people do not use music in lovemaking. I mean, that should be a given, especially for how women are wired.
Are you like Mozart or like Bach? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
No, not exactly. It could be. It could be for someone. I don't want to dismiss that. But normally in one of the modules in my sexual wholeness course for women, one of the lessons is to sit down and just go find a couple of songs, listening to the radio, listening to just music, where you kind of get a little bit of a romantic feel when you listen to it. then those songs are what then you would use as bedroom music. And it's going to be so different for everybody that you're going to have to figure it out on your own, right?
Right.
But I mean, that makes a huge difference. And the biggest struggle that women have is staying focused mentally in the act of lovemaking. Because, you know, guys start to get a little bit turned on and they're all in. Whereas we take we're a slower warm-up time. And so we're more easily distracted until we get further up the arousal scale. And so that music can just help distract you from your thoughts that a woman otherwise is having. Like, can the kids hear us? Did I lock the door? What am I going to make for breakfast tomorrow? Did I put that on my grocery list? That's what the brain does if we're not able to mentally discipline, which is chapter 2, T number 2, thoughts that women have got to develop, that mental self-discipline. So
music can be a secret weapon.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, Dan, you're kidding, but you're not kidding, because this is a big thing in my mind, that women and men have no idea what a huge secret weapon sex can be in a healthy marriage. It's huge, because it just makes that couple really kind of unstoppable and cemented together in a very powerful way. So yeah, you're kidding, but it's really a big deal, you know? Okay, is that enough, or do you need more?
Let's go for more if you have them.
Okay, I've got more. Okay, so different, oh my gosh, yeah, I even brought visual aids for you, Dan. This is
great.
Okay, so senses. Let's change up the senses.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I didn't have any chocolate syrup at home, or I would have brought that too. Just anything to change up the senses. And this is something that I gave out to our ladies at our course, in our online course, just to blindfold. You'll be amazed. I challenged all of the ladies in the course to just have sex blindfolded once, because when you change your senses, it just changes everything. Just one of them. There, you know, you've got multiple different senses to change up. Change up who initiates. If he always initiates, see if we can get her to do initiating sometimes, or change that up. Make out instead of have sex. Have a date where you're just going to make out, and you both know it. It's not going to go anywhere else.
Pressure's off.
Got married, right?
That's great.
It changes it, and it's super fun too. You know. Let's see. Do something that's a surprise. Share fantasies. Just, you know, share your sex bucket list. What would be fun sometime? Oh, this cute girl that was one of my clients, and she said, so Laura, what we've been able to do so far, and this is great for anybody's sex bucket list, she says, we've had sex out in the backyard in a tent. That was super fun. Fairly safe. And so they just together came up with fun ideas like that they could do.
That's great. That's great.
Isn't that fun? I
remember another story in your book about a husband that wanted to have sex in a car. That was on his wish list. She was uncomfortable at first, but she really did mentally process well, maybe I would be comfortable with this under these circumstances.
Right.
So she thought about what would be okay for her.
Yeah.
And when she kind of surprised him with it, this is what we're going to do tonight. And she was even more comfortable than he was at the idea, because she had thought through what's going to make it great. So
yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, it's kind of funny how men sometimes are kind of the ones with the ideas, but when women really develop what I call this mental self-discipline, and that they can do, the mind is such a powerful thing. When people master their thoughts and beliefs and feelings, which why I'm a huge fan of another book called Loving What Is by Byron Katie. It's a profoundly transformative way to think, so that you just are master of any negative thought that comes into your mind. You immediately have the skills and the tools to get rid of it and stay in awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's good. So important, especially in a sexual relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Great. I want to talk to you about what you think about toys and vibrators and things like that.
Yeah, sure. That, there's just a lot of, it's just another important area of having variety and fun and playful and flirty. I think toys can be super helpful. Again, everything, Dan, that we're talking about here today really comes down to two key things. If a man has developed his sexual self-mastery, bridling and mastery of that drive, if a woman has developed and embraced her sexual self, her sexuality. And so when you've got that foundation, then adding in a toy or a game or a fun app like yours or any of that, it's just again, just an organic, natural part of healthy lovemaking, you know? And, you know, vibrators, again, I've got clients that vibrators are kind of they're not just a toy, but a go-to because they've just had a hard time figuring out how to have an orgasm without it. And, you know, they were either far enough into marriage and had never had an orgasm, or they were older in marriage and had a little bit more, you know, variability in how things worked out, that the vibrator just provided a wonderful kind of support system for them that
Yeah.
just made, and again, when you go back to some of my what's okay, what isn't questions, what's the long-term outcome of this vibrator? Well, in their case, it was to strengthen their marriage. So that's how you can kind of gauge all of these questions about, you know, vibrators, lingerie, you know, anything else you want to add.
Gotcha. Yeah, it was introduced to benefit and help the
Yeah,
relationship, not at all to take away or threaten or replace. It's,
right.
I guess, it's all done in the spirit and like the state of your heart, like
Yeah,
as for why you're doing that.
yeah.
That's great. The question I had, Laura, is there a limit to novelty seeking? Like, can it get out of hand where you're just seeking novelty all the time and it's harmful for your marriage?
Yeah, you know, obviously I specialize not just in sex therapy, but kind of sex addiction stuff. And so there are times where unhealthy novelty seeking often comes in a vein of somebody being kind of obsessed with a particular thing. I literally have multiple clients right now that in all of these cases, it's a husband that's just adamant about a particular act in lovemaking that they just think they cannot survive without. And it's creating all kinds of just unhealthy relationship dynamics, as you can imagine. And so it's just kind of that obsessive kind of over focus on one particular act as opposed to the relationship that gets in trouble. And I also see that, and that doesn't have to be porn related, but I also see it often being porn related where, you know, you've developed, you know, porn messes with your sexual template. And so you develop a different arousal style and desire, you know, template. And so then you just feel like that's the only way you can be satisfied. And
Uh-huh.
then we kind of have to undo some of that, and that makes kind of that unhealthy version. The healthy version of novelty seeking, though, is where it's a mutual thing. It's a shared thing where, and again, it's not going to be very possible if we haven't done those two pieces where men have developed that sexual self-mastery and women have done that sexual self-development. And so from that foundation, then when we move towards, hey, let's create a sex bucket list together, then it's a very healthy, what else would be fun to try, you know, kind of a thing.
Okay, great.
Make sense?
Uh, Maybe this is a bigger topic for another
Fine.
time, but if you are a person that has a habit of, sorry, that has a past of habitual pornography use,
Yeah.
and you want to move into something a little more healthy,
Yep.
but that's still in your mind or whatever, how do people get through that?
Yeah,
Does
that's
it
a
just take time and healing, or?
yeah, I mean, that's kind of what addiction recovery is all about. So it's kind of a whole nother animal. I mean, we could write a whole book on just on that, of course, which a lot of good people have done. But maybe a simplified way to think about it is just you're most likely going to have to get into some kind of. I'm such a huge fan of the 12-step program. I wish everybody would have enough of an issue on something that they would get into the 12-step work, because it's such a wonderful way to learn how to turn to God and to partner with God in such a profound way that I almost feel a little bad for people that haven't had a struggle in that kind of a way, and so they don't even know to go in that direction. And so people are going to have to do that kind of work to just unwire that reward system that's been developed through porn. But then not just that, I mean, like I had a therapist say, Laura, I took your first book and I made all of my men in my men's groups, sexual addiction recovery groups, read your book because I needed them to reprogram their minds. You know, if someone's had a lot of porn in their brain, they've got to get stuff. It's kind of like what I say to my wives, women, where I say, you need to get the Knowing Her Intimately on audio and play it in the background of your mind. So it just over and over is reprogramming all of the garbage, pulling out all the weeds and planting in sexual flowers. And that's the same thing men are going to have to do it in the process as well.
Got it. Very good.
Gotcha.
Well, thank you. I want to wrap up today. This has been really good. Can you share with me what you would say is a black belt sex? Like, let's say you've already mastered all the basics and you're having your date night and you're connecting well emotionally. You're a team. Like, what are some real black belt sex stuff that people can learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but this specifically gets into my T number 12, which is that transcendence and surrender. And I think what we're really going to do here, Dan, is just this is where you add God into the sexual relationship, because people that don't have God as a part of that are, again, missing out on a part of wholeness, missing out on a part of, I mean, remember, God's the one that created sex. He's the one that thought it all up, planned out how everybody was going to be wired and how everything was going to work. So he's the master of this. And so when we can add, and this is a real challenge for a lot of women, especially men too struggle with this, but adding in just the concept of sex being something that's godly or divine is just a really big challenge for them. And it's a really big challenge for them also to then be able to kind of let go into that experience, because it's one thing, of course, that we want a woman to be able to let go into the sexual experience, but what if you've got a husband that isn't 100% trustworthy all the time? What if he's betrayed you and yet you want to stay married to him? This is where God comes in. He fills in where us humans fail.
Gotcha.
And now you're able to kind of connect with and feel securely attached because you're as securely attached to God. And so that transcendence of letting go into the sexual experience is one level, but letting go into a connection with God is a whole other level that then makes you very immune to each other's idiosyncrasies and in each other's toxicities even. And so that's where then now we can just take all of this treats and teasing and fun stuff and just take that up into that black belt sex that you're talking about, because it's just kind of a natural outgrowth of that kind of genuine transcendence and surrender.
That's great. Well said. That's excellent, Laura. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where can people find you or learn more about your work or your books, your podcast?
Yeah. So, I mean, my main website is StrengtheningMarriage.com, and my counseling website, where I think we're nearly at 200 resources there as well, is the Marital Intimacy Institute.com. Actually, it's just maritalintimacyinstitute.com. And so those are my two main places. I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Strengthening Marriage or Strengthen Marriage. I think Twitter is Strengthen Marriage. And so people can find that, find me anywhere there. And my books are available anywhere, and especially on my website, StrengtheningMarriage.com, and Amazon and stuff like that. So, and my podcast, the Marital Intimacy Show is the other place, .com as well.
Excellent. Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you. And we'll catch you again another time.
Yes. Wonderful talk to you, and good luck for all of your listeners. I hope they can have a sextraordinary marriage.
Okay? Yes. Yep. Thanks.
Take care.